Well, Dr. Dean Davey's Vice President of Pacific Life Bible College in Surrey, BC, and a certified life coach, experienced a burnout of his own. Let's hear his story. Welcome to 700 Club Canada.
Thank you. Welcome to you too. Nice to meet you, Lori.
Nice to meet you too. You know, you've been a pastor for 17 years and you experienced your own personal, what you call a personal collapse. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, 17 years of pastoring the same church. It'd been a wonderful journey. We had been developing some great ministries and seen some definite success and growth there, and multiplied staff, multiplied the impact that we were having, and really had just loved it and enjoyed it, seeing that development take place. But I've been pushing hard for a lot of years. I've been doing lots of ministry and extending myself. And it all culminated in that final year where we had seen some significant growth, and we ended up purchasing some property next door. And so I was on the hook for, a substantial amount of money. And two of my key staff members, two of my key associate pastors ended up moving on. And one had been with me for 7 years, another one for 10 years. And the church began to plateau, and I was feeling the pressure and the weight of that. Also, a few years prior to that, I started my own nonprofit organization on the side, which took me traveling a lot to Eastern Europe, Africa, and different places. And so I was just physically spent, physically, emotionally spent. And I guess in a way, I was looking for an exit door, but I couldn't get off the machine of church and of ministry, and all of that. I was just feeling so emotionally exhausted, so drained, so much expectation and demand. I just wasn't thinking straight, and the whole thing ended up in a result of failure. And I ended up resigning from the church, and then I confessed what had happened, and my life just imploded. Everything collapsed at that point. Really, it was a loss of all things. I lost everything. Everything I'd been building my life on and building up for 20 years was gone. I lost it all. Everything except for my 4 kids. Me and my kids. I was a single dad for 2 years, living in a little rented 2-bedroom basement suite, and those were dark days. Those were I don't know if you've ever walked in darkness. You just enough just to get out of bed and keep going. Those were challenging times. It really was a loss of all things for me. Very difficult.
Wow. I know there's people watching right now and they might be on the treadmill. Just can't get off, right? And for those of us in ministry, I've led a similar life to you in some ways, like education and ministry. And man, we can just be way too busy to even stop for a moment to reflect on how are we doing. Like underneath that, Dean, as you look back, and obviously you've come through such great healing and many things that you've learned, but what do you think were the main factors that got you there to that collapse? I mean, you've mentioned a few, but what was underneath some of that busyness and, couldn't get off, couldn't stop?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I understand through my research that there are 6 main workplace factors that contribute to burnout, and pastors and ministry leaders are really prime candidates for all of them. But one that's often not talked about is our egoic attachment. And I found that was a critical factor as a young man trying to prove myself, trying to develop something, and really looking for a sense of significance. My sense of attachment to what I was doing was just too invested, too involved. And I didn't have the support networks around that really helped me kind of step back and deal with some of that. And so it really was in essence, almost a need for failure. I don't mean that lightly. I don't mean that in a demeaning sort of way, but it really was necessary for me to kind of wake up, even though it was like a death in a lot of ways, but it helped reveal some things that were very significant to who I am really as a person.
Well, what I hear you saying in that is really the core identity issues, right, are at the core of why so many of us, get off track. We're attaching our identity to the wrong things. Yeah. And now you say something very profound. You said that there's a transformative potential in failure. What do you mean by that?
Well, failure has a way of disorienting us. It has a way of revealing reality to us in a greater way. I think what happens is we end up attaching ourselves to certain images, and maybe even images we want to believe about ourselves, and we try to frame our life in some sort of success narrative, and yet constantly over and over we see this pattern uh, of life, of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. And so failure is that disorienting element, but it's necessary to lead us to reorientation. And we see that as like just a constant biblical pattern through that narrative. I mean, you have this constant promise and then reversal and then fulfillment. You have Abraham's promised a son, and then the reversal, it's barrenness for 13 years. You ever have to wait 13 years for a promise, you know?
Yeah.
But then Isaac is born, right? And we see that over and over. Joseph is going to rule, and then we find him as a slave in a prison, and then next he's ruling. David's going to anointed king, and then we find him as a political refugee, and now he's a king. And so we see this pattern over and over, but it's that failure element, it's that reversal time that's necessary to help transform us into a greater reality that we were never actually in control in the first place.
Yeah, I think that is the wake-up call. I've
Mm-hmm.
had a few of my own wake-up calls, so I can relate to that. And it often is maybe the death of a dream, and maybe that dream is our own identity and the things we've secured ourselves to or fed our ego by. You know, we only have a minute here, but what would you say to people who have had their own experience of collapse or burnout, and they feel like a failure?
Yeah, that's a significant. In some ways, maybe it sounds simple, but don't give up.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge for us, is that we want to give up in those reversal times. We want to give up in our failures, as if somehow failure is not the final word. It doesn't need to be what defines you.
Yeah.
But you own it. You embrace it. It's like, welcome to humanity.
Yeah.
I own that. But in my owning and the embracing of my brokenness, I'm able to let go of my image idols, my egoic attachments. And I think that's where we actually find freedom. And so you don't give up. You embrace the fragility of your humanity, your own brokenness, and you see that God actually has a much deeper identity for who you are than what we often find ourselves attaching to.
Oh, wow. I mean, we could talk a long time about this. I'm very passionate myself in my own life lesson of learning. My true identity is really my attachment to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And anything else I've attached myself to has always left me disappointed. So thank you for your honesty. I'd love to have more time. I hope we have you back to hear more of your story. But if you're feeling like a failure, you're struggling right now, feeling like you're in the middle of burnout, take courage from Dean's story. If you want more about Dean and opportunities for life coaching, go to 700club.ca and all his information's there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks for having me, Lori.